Steve, you want to go ahead? You want me to get started? I know it's like 10 minutes late, so I'll try to speed it up.
Sure. Let me just speed it up. So thank you everyone for joining DataCon LA 2021. Thank you for bearing with us. This is the AI machine learning data science track. I'm your host, Stephen. Reza is our co-host today. Our guests today are Idris Motiwala and Ian Maxon, and they'll be talking about how to get real-time insights from your JSON data. So a bit about both of them. Idris is a principal product manager in analytics at Couchbase with 20 plus years experience in design, development, and execution of software products. And he holds an MS in technology management and certifications in product management. Ian is a developer on Couchbase Analytics and a staff member on the Asterisk DB project UC Irvine. And he's also a member of the Apache Asterisk DB project management committee. Ian has an MS in computer science from UC Irvine. And so without further ado, I'll hand this over to our speakers. Thank you, Idris and Ian.
Hey, thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Ian, for being here. Thank you, DataCon LA. I'm being privileged to be part of this. And more importantly, I've also been part of the volunteering efforts here. Thank you so much. Can you all see my screen really well?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to skip to the agenda. So what we're going to cover today is, as Stephen said, I'm from Couchbase, and Ian is as well. So we're going to cover a little bit about Couchbase Data Platform for folks who are not familiar with Couchbase, some of the business analytics challenges, what is Couchbase Analytics, right? And some of the use cases, and talk a little bit about the features. I'm really going to jump in the cool feature, which we just recently deployed in Couchbase Analytics. It's about integrating AI machine learning language capabilities into Couchbase Analytics. So Couchbase, what is Couchbase? Essentially, it is a modern database. It is not the traditional relational database, which you typically see, which you might be used to. So this is essentially the ability to store schema-less, unstructured data into a database. So we have key value stored, has capabilities of query, indexing, with all the plethora of data which you get. And because of schema changes, Couchbase is a document-oriented model, which you can, it's built, it's memory-based, it's highly distributed and memory first. As you can see, it stores everything in JSON documents and performs at scale. As you can see in the graphs here, it scales compared to our competitors, which is MongoDB data stacks. As the number of nodes scales, the throughput, the operations per second scales even better. So it has a lot of the capabilities, including analytics, which is what's the key topic about this talk. And I will get to there in a minute. But a little bit about, how are we helping our customers across various use cases? It may not necessarily fit all use cases, but as you can see, we have more and more sessions. We have more logging. We have interactive with IoT devices. A plethora of data has been coming in. And to manage that as and when it comes in, and the structure is not the same, it keeps on changing based on geography, your demographics, based on your products, your locations, and your customer data, a variety of different things. And as you can see, some of these use cases we are seeing is to get all this information and meet the business goals to time to market, time to insights, and reduce the total cost of ownership, and reducing any of this cart abandonment. As you can see, when you log in a session and you only complete a portion of it and you don't complete the other, how to improve those experiences. It's really an end-to-end customer experiences. And you can see in AI and big data, we do real-time analytics, risk analysis, fraud detection. We're going to talk about a focus on this session is real-time analytics with Couchbase Analytics. So without further ado, what are some of the JSON analytics challenges? Probably folks are familiar with JSON. You might be working with it. Number one, this is, by the way, coming from our customers. Customers say that, hey, we want to analyze the JSON data in real time without the need to ETL. What does that mean? It means as and when your data is coming in, you want to do analytics real time on your operational data. Then some of the customers like, man, querying JSON in RDBMS is cumbersome. And they're embedded in the RDBMS, row column structure in between. And I have to extract that thing out and then apply my query language and the expressiveness of the query. I have to do all these things. It is cumbersome. Also, they want to isolate the operational workloads from analytical workloads. What does that mean? I'm like, hey, I'm running my transactions. My data is getting created. My sessions are getting created. People are creating my profile information. I don't want to be querying on the same time, giving all of the things on the top 20% of the users who have created in the last 30 days, or all these analytical queries. I don't want to be loading that operational data. So they want to isolate it. So with all these things in mind, what we decided was Couchbase Analytics to allow you to measure real-time operations to derive those insights. So we looked at all these challenges, we looked at the industry, provided the ability to analyze JSON and real data in real time, isolate the operational analytical workloads, and no need for ETL. How do we do this? Okay, I'm going to explain this, try to keep it and connect all the points together. You have a simple application, or a complex application, a web application, a mobile application. It has operational data. Think about Facebook, think about Apple, think about your day-to-day usage of Google Maps. You enter some information, that data gets stored into a database, right? And Couchbase provides something called a data service, which is all stored in your key value stored JSON style format. When you enable analytics service, right, it creates a shadow copy of those data sets. It only becomes read-only. It's only select. You cannot do any insert, update, or deletes. So by just doing that, you achieve workload isolation. Right? So now you have this analytics service, as you can see. I'm not sure what color it's coming in. It's probably orange. And by doing that, right, you don't need to do any ETL. Your data in its native format in JSON is available for analytics. But you'll be like, wait a sec. Okay, how does this fit in the entire ecosystem? Well, you have BI visualization. So we have our nickel for analytics, which is a powerful expressive language, which is as similar as SQL. So for SQL developers, this is fantastic, right? So we have capabilities and drivers working with a third party, which enables you to connect into BI visualization tools like Tableau, Power BI, Qlik, etc. Then we'll talk about, wait a sec, we have data science. Well, yeah. So we have APIs which you can write in Jupyter Notebook. You can take all this information, you can take into your favorite BI tool. You can have connectors, connect into RapidMiner. But wait, this session, this last previous release, we introduced something called Python UDFs for machine learning, right? Which you're calling it ML meets SQL, which a rock star Ian is going to be talking about in a few. And we also have the ability to extend your data to reach into the data lake. For example, if your data or your cold storage data is sitting in archive format in S3 or even in Azure, which we have recently launched, you can now tap into that data, right, from Couchbase Analytics with no need to ETL, with no need to move your data, real time. And that's what we're calling about the real-time operational data. At the same time, we realized that JSON and Couchbase could just be one of your many databases in your ecosystem. There's ERPs, there's Salesforce, there's Marketo, variety of different systems. You also have the ability to take that data and put it into your data warehouse to do an enterprise-wide data warehouse. So capability. So just wanted to make sure everybody understands how does Couchbase and Couchbase Analytics fits into the entire ecosystem. Right. So moving on to the next slide, key use cases. Number one, e-commerce. We have a food delivery company. They're using this for real-time analysis and personalized campaigns. So as and when you're ordering your food, your delivery, you can actually find out, hey, I'm running this models, extracting from the operational data and running those models in real time while the other portions of the data go into the data warehouse for other analysis. You can do this experiments in real time. Finance. One of the biggest banks in Europe is they do derivatives, trading, asset management. They have a third-party data, which this is one of the use cases getting into their systems on a nightly basis. And they have heavy computations determining the risk scores and propensity modeling. So they use analytics service behind, so they're not loading up the operational data and you're using faster calculations and then giving it to their business units for reporting and analysis. Healthcare. One of the companies here, they focus on optimizing revenue solutions, revenue for their customers, hospitals, clinics, etc. They're in the last 1 year, especially with the COVID situation, people are asking more and more data. People were canceling their office visits, their procedures, etc. So the scale and the volume data just grew. So they wanted to do what if analysis. So they enable using Couchbase Analytics service to redesign the architecture, completely redid their data modeling, and what they did was they used Power BI as well as a partner C data drivers to use Delta data coming in between from analytics service and enable that streamless and seamless data of, well, as and when they were created to make it available for reporting in BI. And last but not the least, we have in the energy and utilities, we're consolidating various natural rigs, and vessels which are there across the world, and they're consolidating all the data from various places, the distributed data in various places, and collecting and doing the analysis on the analytics server capabilities. Because Analytics is based on a massively parallel processing architecture. So the more distribution, the more query, it will be much faster. And that's what one of the key advantages of using analytics service. As our CTO says, our focus is on data first and schema next. And we really focus on providing insights, analytics at the speed of transaction based on our MPP architecture. And it's faster time to insights and enables faster decisions. Very, very powerful. So new product features, I'm going to quickly cover this. So make sure I'm still okay on time. Analytics collections. This is a new capability where now you can logically put your JSON data and structure just like you would do in a relational database management system. It's like you would have a schema, just like you have tables, and you have almost exactly the same thing. You can logically do that. And so analytics service completely supports it. We now have the support for analytics user-defined functions. So folks who are developing queries, you have to define content reusable queries, passing parameters, streamline your code. We support that in analytics service. We also have powerful capabilities like rollup and cube aggregations. And you might be thinking, rollup and cube has been there in RDBMSs for years. Well, guess this is NoSQL. This is unstructured data. So doing it on an unstructured data is a different ballgame than doing it on structured rows and columns. So now it supports it. So you can do your highly analytical queries. You want to see your rollups based on your country and then by region and within that by city, right? And you also want extra aggregations done by that. You can do that. You can see by dates. You can see by a particular, another element, for example, sales, by quarter, month, year. You can do all combinations of that using Cube. So Cube generates combinations of all counts. The other two features which are in preview, the first one is integrating your Python ML models, which is what this talk is all about. It enables data engineers, data scientists, machine learning engineers to use your Python created models. In fact, it's any created Python model, but more specifically, you can take your machine learning models, which is what we're going to talk about, and integrate with Couchbase Analytics. And we also support Azure Blob Storage using external data set, so you can dynamically retrieve, combine, and analyze the data from Azure Blob Storage, just like we can do today with Amazon S3, using the Couchbase collections. So talking about Python UDFs, right, and the need for that, what are some of the needs and challenges? One of the things was, how can I do my job without ETL, without data wrangling, without getting, I'm getting my operations data coming in from my products, etc., or by hotels. Let's say I'm in a hotel industry, I'm looking for a hotel, but my reviews are sitting on another area, or this, how do I get everything without doing my ETL? How can I actually do all this without the hassle of data movement, which is exactly like ETL, but also, let's say I'm creating models, but also I don't want my data to be coming here. I have to do all these changes here. How can I do my hypothesis in one place rather than moving all these various times? And how can I get my predictive insights using my Python models? Basically, how do I have my models and my data to coexist in the same location? And having seen these challenges and hearing from our customers, we created this feature of ML meets no SQL, or creating a technical thing is called Python UDFs. It enables data scientists and machine learning engineers to integrate their models with Couchbase Analytics. How do you do it? 5 steps. Train your ML model, which data scientists do in their world in Python. The creative libraries exist, right? Then you create a Python library. Then you package and deploy. You define the UDFs. Then you use those Python UDFs. And boom, after that, you start deriving insights. So hopefully I was in time for Ian to take it away from. Ian is going to talk about and get you into the details. And Ian, take it away from here.
All right. Thanks, Idris. Okay. All right. So can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, sweet. All right. Yeah. Yep. So yeah, I'm Ian Maxon. I'm an engineer at Couchbase at UC Irvine. Been working on Python UDFs, so I'll be talking about it. So what's the idea behind it? Why have Python UDFs in particular, just instead of other UDFs? Because up until this point, Couchbase Analytics did not have any sort of UDF besides this and nickel UDFs are appearing at the same time. So the main motivation was for machine learning purposes, right? And so to pick Python, right? Python is, by and large, it's the lingua franca of data science, right? It's just ubiquitous. Everything kind of has some sort of compatibility with it. And so, yeah, if you have Python UDFs, right, you could just go ahead and wrap up your machine learning model in its Python wrapper and call it as a user-defined function. And just in general, Python's a great kind of Swiss Army knife language. So it's just good for UDFs in general. So what does this mean exactly? Okay, so let's give a brief example. So imagine that I have a module, right? My functions.py, and inside of it, it has this function round trip, right? And it just takes var args and it returns. And then to package it, we're going to use this tool called shiv, which basically you can imagine takes your code and then all of the dependencies, right, the requirements, and packages it up, right? So in this case, we're going to say it uses NumPy. It doesn't actually use NumPy, but just for an example. And then to upload it, right? We have an API endpoint, right? And so for that, we give it as a multi-part form data request, right? And so if you look, the type equals Python, right? That's saying what language the UDF is in. The data field is the actual library content. And then we have this URL endpoint where this 8095 analytics / library / default / mylib. So the last two components of the URL, the default and mylib, are the scope, and then mylib is the actual name of the library. So that's going to be an artifact inside of the database at that name. And then after that, you can create these bindings loosely. So it's not whatever the name of the function is in Python is not necessarily bound into Nickel directly. You can change it later. So we're going to call it round trip because there's no function named round trip. So it works fine. There's no naming conflicts. And we're going to say it's going to say create analytics function round trip as my functions, right, which is the module name. So we say the module name here. And then we have, after that, we have the function name, because this is a top level function, but you can also use classes and modules, right? And it's at mylib, which is the name of the library that we just uploaded. And then after that, you can just use it like any other scalar Nickel for Analytics function, right? You can just go ahead and it just behaves as normal. And you might be wondering, okay, so wait a minute, aren't you uploading arbitrary code? And the answer is yes, but you can only do it, basically you can only do this from localhost, the upload part, and you have to have full administrator, which is kind of the highest permission that you can have inside of analytics. And to create these function bindings, you need to have a slightly lower, but still highly privileged permission called analytics admin. All right, so to give a scenario for the demo, right? Imagine we have this travel site, Come Fly Away, right? And they want to give the users greater controls over, how they book their, they book their trips, and they say, okay, I want to let the traveler choose nearby locations, and I want them to be able to look at the sentiment of the reviews using an ML model. And then just give a little brief overview of the data. So this is the integrated data, the travel sample that's inside of Couchbase itself. And we're going to use two data sets of that, the airport location data and the hotels, which have reviews inside of them and nested inside as a list. And then for the UDFs, I'll be showing a few really simple UDFs, but the two that are a little bit more complicated are some ML ones. And so one is just the Roberta, which is from Facebook AI. And we use that for sentiment analysis. So just a very simple use of it. And then we're also going to have a brief example of a logistic regression using scikit-learn that was just trained on some airline reviews. All right, so with that, let's get to the demo. So first things first, can go ahead and so first I'll show some examples of the UDFs. So a really simple one, just to give an idea of how to write one, right, would be this sentiment underscore simple.py. So this is a UDF that's in a class. So basically in the constructor here, right, we're going to open a text file called good.txt, and we're just going to load those lines in, right, as a array, right? And then we'll have this function called sentiment that we'll actually bind to call, right? And that will, look at the word, it'll look at the words, right? And if that word, basically if the word that's in the argument, right, is in the list that we loaded previously, we'll return great, and otherwise return eh. But the thing to notice, basically the thing to notice about this function is that this object will exist for the lifetime of the query. So we can load this file without having to load it for every tuple, because this function here will be called for every invocation. It'll be called once per tuple that's received as part of the query. And just to show the file here, right? So it contains spam, eggs, and ham. So if it's spam, eggs, or ham, it'll say, okay, it's great. And otherwise, it'll say, eh. So with that said, let's just go ahead and upload it. So we'll go ahead and upload it. And so what this is doing is actually it's spraying it across the cluster and unzipping it and making sure that all of it's there on all the nodes in the cluster, right? Because as Idris mentioned, it's an MPP architecture. So we have to distribute this and send it across all the nodes and make sure that it's there. Otherwise, the query would give odd results. All right. So we got a 200. We're good. So now we can create the function bindings like I was showing. So right, we have this is the example that was in the nutshell slide. This is the simple sentiment that I was just showing. This is the scikit example that I was alluding to earlier. That's just a logistic regression. This is the Roberta one. And so you can see most of these are actually, they're not simple functions. They're actually members of classes. So that's what the dot is about. You basically say the class name and then the method name inside of the class. And then we'll have another UDF in here that's for a later query that's also in the, also to note these are in 2 different libraries. All right, so now to get to actually using the UDFs, right? So in the round trip example, right, that's pretty much saying, okay, you give it an argument and it returns the arguments that you give it, right? So we get in and run it and it does exactly what you'd expect. It just gives you back what you give it. And then in the simple sentiment, right? So as we were looking at that, let's say if it's in spam, egg, or ham, it'll be good. And otherwise, it'll be eh. So let's run this. As you can see, it ran our code. And since beef is not in there, it went ahead and returned eh. And then we can just show this very, very basic logistic regression. For most of the queries, we're actually using the better example, the better sentiment analyzer. So this just basically tries to get the positive or negative sentiment. It'll return positive, negative, or neutral. And so it works okay for little things like this, but Roberta is obviously better. So to go back to the example, the business example that I was alluding to, right, is that basically, so I stayed in a hotel, right, last time I went to SFO, right, and it was called Laurel Inn, right, and if we look at the reviews of this, right, there's one that says it has bed bugs, right, so that was not a good experience. So I want to find other hotels that are near SFO that don't have any mention of bed bugs and also have good reviews, right? I want it to be good other than that, right? So to construct an analytics query to get me this, right, I could say, okay, so give me the name of the hotel, right, from the hotels and airports where the airport is SFO, right, as I mentioned, and the distance in miles between the hotel and the airport is less than 11, right? So this was defined as a UDF, right? And so basically it just does a really simple, it just does Euclidean distance. It's very simple. It's not really spatial, but for these purposes, being this close, it should work okay. And then for in the reviews, right, which is a nested object inside of the hotel records, right, we're going to say for all of the reviews, there should not be a content, which is the text of the review. There should not be a content that contains the string bedbug. So we'll go ahead and run that, right? And that'll give us a relatively small list of hotels, right? So there's only like what? So there's 5 here, right? And so now, right, I want to know about the sentiment of it, right? So we can go ahead and refine this query a little bit to use the UDF we defined earlier, right? Which basically takes a list of the sentiments, right? So it takes a list of texts, right? And then we'll return the sentiment, that'll return the total sentiment count of each. So it'll return the positive and negative sentiments. But other than that, it's more or less the same query as before. We're just adding the sentiment to it. So in this case, we'll get the name and we will get the number of positive and negative reviews for that nested list inside of the hotel itself, right? And so we can see there's some here, right, have quite a few negative reviews, right, like Parker House. Or this one, right, it has 2 negative reviews, only 4, so it's like 1 to 3. So, right, we could probably choose this one in San Francisco, right? It seems to have positive reviews and no negative reviews. And so, yeah, that's how Python UDFs in Couchbase Analytics work. So just to give a brief end to it. So basically, right, these models, right, you're able to call these Python ML models on your data without having to move it between different systems, right? You can call these as part of any arbitrary nickel for analytics query. You can just write the query and it's all in there. And this, of course, allows you to have a lot more powerful queries that let you find very interesting things. And it's also very fast, right? Because you don't have to move the data back and forth. You just have to upload the UDF, and that's all there is to it. And just to give a brief overview of how this works on the inside, right? You wonder like how are you executing these? So as I mentioned, right, this is MPP. It's a analytics as an MPP architecture, right? And so this is all your UDF when it's uploaded, right? And you run it. It runs in parallel across all of the partitions of the data, right? So you don't have to explicitly parallelize it, other than just make sure that the UDF is functional, right? That it doesn't have external dependencies or write to disk or things like this, right? And so each analytics node, we call it internally, we call it a node controller, right? And so for each node controller, there will be, for each library, you will fork off a Python process that has a wrapper that calls the function, and then it takes the arguments from the query in standard in and then gives it back on localhost on a port. But it multiplexes on the port, so you don't have an explosion of port use. And yeah, this happens in parallel across all of the nodes. And so in terms of what's next, so right now, these UDFs just run as the Couchbase user. They're not fenced. That's why it's part of the reason it's developer preview. So that will be coming. As you saw, right, we're using Shiv and curl and all these things that are a little bit verbose to package them. There will be a front end that kind of, it makes these details a little bit nicer and more user friendly. And then, yeah, right now the interpreters are torn down and booted back up for every query, which is okay if your query, like the ones we were showing, that take a few seconds. But if your queries are short, that can be a problem. So you can go ahead and reuse those. That's just kind of low-hanging fruit. And there's a variety of other kind of performance improvements that will be forthcoming. So yeah, I think that is about all I had. So thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thanks very much, Idris and Ian. So we do have some questions posted in the chat already. So Ho-Chan is asking, what is the restriction to JSON type data? And for instance, searching heavily nested JSON. And number two, do you have any built-in schema registry on Couchbase?
Let's see. Idris, do you want to take it?
Yeah. On the first one, I think the restriction to JSON type, if you're referring to RDBMS side, then really there are restrictions on how to extract those and do querying with, for example, if it's a SQL database or if it's an Oracle database, and they have JSON data types, it's really extracting. So it's really what level can you nest and how can you, those are restrictions, but not in Couchbase, because Couchbase is JSON to begin with. So really there are no restrictions. And when you're talking about built-in schema registry, really we have the ability to use Nickel and 1QL, the query which you saw Ian writing. You can use all of this expressive query-like language to extract and do all your analysis. And I don't know if there's a built-in schema. I don't know, Ian, if you want to take a shot at that.
Oh, of which the schema for
built-in schema registry? Do we have any built-in schema? It's really.
Oh, you mean the so you mean the Explorer in query?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Let me see. I may not have query running this. I think I might be running it though. Let me check.
Yeah. So we have built-in functions and capabilities for you to extract the data out of JSON from Couchbase specifically. So not talking about other RDBMSs and other capabilities.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Actually, I do have it. I can show briefly.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. So So in the travel example right there, so we're looking at hotel, right? You can go inside the query console and you can find, oh, right. So hotel has this schema. Right, and inside of it, it has these reviews, right, which is a review of object, right, and then the reviews themselves have a type, so you can look at the schema. But of course, it's 100% consistent. It doesn't have to be consistent. It can be, free form. It can be semi-structured.
Thank you, Ian. Good question, Ho-Chan.
Yes. So the next question is from Cervantes, and he's asking, can your solution be applied to restaurant companies which mostly applications are tied to point of sales?
Absolutely. In fact, we do have a customer who uses, sure, we have restaurant customers, but this one specifically for analytics, it's an online grocery. It's a grocery store based out of EMEA, France, and they do point of sales. And absolutely, they take all of the data, extract it out, and they put in the analytics service, and they using even the S3 capability to get archive data, like 2 years old worth of data. And not only real time, but also past. So they compare the sales and they do promotions and marketing and and all those kind of capabilities. So yes, absolutely, to answer your question.
Great. So we have another question from Bharat. And he's asking, how do we handle the JSON data that is structured in different formats for the same purpose?
Interesting. Ian, you want to take that?
I'm not sure that I totally understand it. I can try and answer what I understand of it. So it's like, so I mean, so if I understand it, like if I could, my understanding would be like, if you have a JSON data, if you have something that's in JSON, right, and it's structured one way, right? Like you have two different schemas, right? Or not schemas, right? But you have two different forms of the same object, right? That may exist in the same collection, right? Or just, however you want to, whatever terminology you want to use, right? You can go ahead, like there's a variety of tools that you could use in Nickel for Analytics to go over that, right? The data doesn't have to fit a particular schema, right? You may have to use things like case when or like other tools, right? So there's like, you could use case when, you could use different where clauses, you can use lots of different things to look at different types of objects in the same, like, I don't know, the same query, right? Yeah. Or like say that there's something, like say that there's like one distinguishing feature, right? And maybe they're not even in the same collection. You could use a where clause and join on those, right? So you could get two different objects, right? And you could use like a like, right? And you could basically rename the field so that they're all conted together. Like there's many different ways to approach that, to fix, to basically like deal with it in a like you don't have to copy things, right? Like nothing like that, right? Just basically writing a query that will handle it in and of itself.
Yeah, and then Bharat is saying that, it may be labeled in different ways. So I'm assuming Bharat, you're mentioning about the JSON data. So with collections now, you can actually, if you could have what you call high level is called buckets, right? It's like your databases. Then you have your schemas, right? And then you have your tables, right? And then you have your actual all the columns within that. So you can definitely have different formats within the collection, which may be which may be completely different here. But then you can all join it all together to query using Nickel for Analytics. Hopefully that helps, Bharat. Let me know if our answer made sense. If not, hit us up separately. We'll do a one-on-one specifically looking at your use case. All right, good. Thank you, Bharat. Great.
So yes, is there anyone else who has any questions? Please feel free to post in the Q&A. So I think we have a few more minutes, right? Because we got off to a bit of a late start. So I guess I can ask a question of my own, right? Which is, I mean, you clearly focused on JSON because it's such an important data type, right? But are there other sort of like data files and types that you sort of consider developing this like real-time like capability for? And do you have any plans to expand on that in the future?
So I can take a stab, and then Ian, you can take a stab. So just within Couchbase, it's all document. We call it document database, all JSON. But for analytics perspective, we are tapping into formats like CSV, TSV. We are working on Parquet, which is going to be available next year, where if those kind of file formats are stored in, let's say, S3 or Azure or let's say Google Cloud, you can tap into that format, right? But you don't need to do any ETL, right? It does dynamically at that point in time retrieve. It's a stateless connection. You can call it serverless, stateless. All you need is a connection pointer, just like, and we can do that. So not necessarily handling and creating different formats and storing within our Performer format per se. But really, we have the flexibility to do that. Ian, I don't know if you have anything else.
Yeah, I guess, but yeah, my only addendum to this, like, so the open source project that that Couchbase Analytics is based on, AsterixDB, has always had CSV support back when like RC was a thing that was very popular, right? It had RC format, so it's always had like getting data in, right, that maybe in different formats was always a thing. And yeah, they keep adding to it, right? The CSV format was improved with 7.0, right? The Parquet is forthcoming, right? So yeah, there's definitely bringing in other data from other forms, even semi-structured or not, has always been a thing.
Right, and we have thought about getting Avro as well, so it's coming up.
Great.
Hope that helps, Stephen.
Thank you very much. Yes, it does.
Right.
So do we have any further questions from the audience? So if not, unless you guys have a little bit, I guess you guys can have a little bit more time, right? Because we got started so late. If you have any just closing thoughts or any pitches that you'd like to make for for Couchbase.
Well, so as I said, Couchbase. I mean, I don't think a lot of people know about it, but it's a capability I think you should be considering if you're developing applications, especially which you want responses in micro milliseconds, especially session caching, even like all of the use cases, right, from e-commerce to finance, as I talked about. But essentially, I think the ability what we offer is all these advanced capabilities like analytics on top of JSON is something a lot of people are not aware of, because people think, oh, there's data warehouse. Okay, let's go take it to Snowflake. But you have to do an Egypt. They don't realize that there's a lot of spend time which is spent, cost of ownership is higher, processes, skill sets. Another beauty about Couchbase, a lot of people don't know, is the language, which you call Nickel, is very, very similar to SQL. So people who are familiar to SQL, which people like me actually were born and brought up with when we got into professional careers, it's very seamless. As you saw, Ian see some of the SQL queries, they're exactly SQL-like, but we also have extended to support all these nested arrays, object into object arrays. And I think you'll see that the beauty about Couchbase is about that. And measure real-time insight as well as data is being created, I think it's just phenomenal. So
awesome.
Ian? That was my pitch.
Anything
Ian, do you have?
Oh,
Ian, you have 30 seconds.
Oh, 30 seconds. Yeah, Idris said it better than I ever could. That's
no.
All right, great.
Thank you, Ian.
So
thank you guys.
So thank you both Idris and Ian for your presentation, and the attendees for all your questions and very lively interactions during this session. You can contact the speakers directly if there's any further questions regarding this topic. And please provide your feedback using the form in the chat box. And so thank you again, everyone, for joining today's presentation. I hope you gained some valuable insights from our session today. So have a wonderful day. Pardon?
I want to thank Cervantes, and I want to thank Honchan and Bharat for asking those questions. And thank you for attending, everyone for attending our session. Really appreciate that.
Yes.
Oh, and just another note, Couchbase Connect 2021 is our annual conference that's coming up next month. October 20th to 21st. We don't have a slide or selfish thing to promote it, but if you guys are interested, lots and lots and lots more to learn besides just Couchbase Analytics. So feel free to attend. I'll be hosting sessions as well as I have sessions separately on analytics. So quite a few sessions on analytics, a lot on data, a lot of customers are talking about it. It's free, and you got I think they have a lot of rewards and points as well. So if you attend that, look forward to seeing some of you there, or all of you there, for that matters.
Sounds great, Idris. So yes, so thank you all very much again, and have a wonderful day. And thanks for being a part of this year's DataCon LA. And thanks again, Idris and Ian, and have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Have a good one.